Hello, everyone. Nice to see you again in today's story. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to my channel. I didn't steal anything. This is my money. 13-year-old Jessica Williams stood trembling at the customer service counter, her voice breaking with frustration as she pleaded. But bank manager Sharon Mitchell's face twisted with pure disgust as she stared down at the young black girl. A girl like you, with this much cash? I don't think so. You probably robbed someone. Jessica's eyes filled with tears as the humiliation hit her. This was supposed to be simple. She was just trying to open her first checking account. Please, just let me call my mom, she begged. Sharon sneered with cold satisfaction. Save it for the police. I'm not falling for your sob story. Without hesitation, she grabbed the phone and dialed. Yes, I need officers immediately. I have a young thief trying to deposit stolen money. But Sharon Mitchell had no idea she had just made the biggest mistake of her career, because in less than an hour, she would discover exactly who Jessica's mother was, and when she did, her entire world came crashing down. What happened next exposed not just Sharon's shocking racism, but a secret so powerful, it changed everything. Before we start the story, if you stand against racism and prejudice, click the subscribe button, type yes, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. You will definitely get a reply from us. A bright Tuesday afternoon, 13-year-old Jessica Williams practically bounced with excitement as she stepped off the city bus downtown. Today isn't just any day. Today is the day she finally proves to her mother that she's responsible enough to handle her own banking for weeks. Jessica had been planning this moment. She'd researched different types of accounts online, practiced what she would say to the bank representative, and even rehearsed walking confidently through those glass doors. This wasn't just about opening a checking account. This was about independence, maturity, and taking her first real step into the adult world. Jessica Williams lived in a world most teenagers could only dream of. Her days began in a mansion nestled in the exclusive Hillrest Estates, where perfectly manicured lawns stretched as far as the eye could see. She attended Westfield Preparatory Academy, where tuition cost more than most people's annual salary, and where her biggest concern was maintaining her perfect 4.0 GPA. But here's what made Jessica different from other wealthy kids. She had no idea just how wealthy her family really was. Her mother had deliberately raised her to believe they were simply comfortable. Jessica took the bus to school instead of being chauffeured in luxury cars. She shopped at normal stores, not designer boutiques. She earned her allowance by doing chores and maintaining good grades. This carefully constructed normal life was no accident. Dr. Angela Rodriguez Williams had learned from her own childhood that extreme wealth could be both a blessing and a curse. She remembered being constantly watched, photographed, and judged as the heir to the Rodriguez banking empire. So when Jessica was born, Angela made a decision that would shape her daughter's entire worldview. She would raise Jessica to understand the value of hard work and humility before she ever learned about the family's true power. As Jessica walked into First National Bank that afternoon, she carried with her an envelope containing $800 in birthday money from her grandmother Rodriguez, money that represented months of careful saving and birthday gifts in her backpack. She had her savings account statements showing all $200 accumulated from allowances, holiday gifts, and small rewards for academic achievements. To Jessica, this felt like a fortune to her family. It was pocket change. The bank's lobby buzzed with typical afternoon activity. Business professionals in sharp suits hurried between teller windows. Elderly customers patiently waited in the VIP section, and the soft hum of financial conversations filled the air. Jessica took a deep breath, straightened her school uniform, and approached the customer service desk with a confidence that came from never having been treated as anything less than valued and respected. Jessica walked up to the first available teller window with a bright smile, clutching her envelope of birthday money and her backpack full of documents. The nameplate on the counter read, Jennifer Adams, Customer Service Representative. Jennifer looked up from her computer screen, and immediately her expression shifted when she saw the young black girl standing at her window. Her welcoming smile disappeared, replaced by a look of disgust and suspicion. "What do you want?" Jennifer asked coldly, her voice dripping with hostility as she looked Jessica up and down like she was something unpleasant. "Hi, good afternoon," Jessica said cheerfully, trying to maintain her positive attitude despite the woman's obvious rudeness. "I'd like to open my first checking account, please. I'm really excited about this." Jennifer let out a harsh laugh. "Are you serious right now? This is a real bank, not some community center. We don't just hand out accounts to every kid who wanders in here." Jessica's smile began to falter. "I'm 13, and I have all the required documentation." "I've been saving for this 13, Jennifer interrupted with a sneer. "And let me guess, you've got cash from selling drugs or stealing from people. That's usually how kids like you get money around here." Jessica felt like she'd been slapped. "Kids like me? I don't understand. I go to Westfield Prep. This is birthday money from my grandmother." "Sure it is," Jennifer said mockingly. "Westfield Prep, right? You probably stole that uniform too. I know exactly what kind of neighborhood you come from, and it's not the kind that sends kids to fancy schools. I'm calling my manager right now to deal with this situation. She knows exactly how to handle people like you." Jennifer picked up her phone and dialed with dramatic flourish. "Sharon, you need to get over to window 3 immediately. I've got one of those urban kids here trying to scam us with suspicious cash." "Yeah, exactly. The type we talked about in our staff meeting. She's getting aggressive and making a scene within minutes." Bank manager Sharon Mitchell appeared at the teller window, ready to take control of what Jennifer had described as a typical urban troublemaker situation. She looked up from her paperwork, her eyes immediately fixed on Jessica, a young black girl standing in her pristine lobby, and something cold and calculating flashed across her face. The warm, professional smile she typically reserved for customers never appeared. "Shouldn't you be in school, young lady?" Sharon's first words weren't welcoming or helpful. They were immediately accusatory, dripping with suspicion. Jessica blinked, taken aback by the harsh tone, but maintained her polite demeanor. "Oh, I have permission from my school and my parents. I arranged to leave early, specifically for this appointment." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a signed permission slip from her school counselor. But Sharon barely glanced at the paper. Her attention was fixed on the envelope Jessica had placed on the counter when Jessica opened it to show her the neatly stacked bills. Sharon's expression darkened even further. "That's a lot of cash for someone your age. Where did you get this?" The question came out like an interrogation, not customer service. Jessica felt the first flutter of confusion in her stomach. Why was this woman being so hostile in her sheltered world? Having money had never been questioned before. "It's birthday, money from my grandmother and some savings I've been keeping at home. I wanted to deposit it all when I opened my checking account." Sharon's laugh was sharp and humorless. "I find that hard to believe. Grandmothers don't typically give 13-year-olds $800 in cash." The accusation hit Jessica like a physical blow. She'd never had her honesty questioned before, never been treated with such open skepticism. "But it's true. She always gives generous birthday gifts. I can show you the card she wrote with it." Jessica fumbled through her backpack and produced a beautiful birthday card with her grandmother's handwriting, but Sharon waved it away without even looking. Anyone can write a card. These could all be fake, Sharon said dismissively, gesturing at Jessica's carefully prepared documentation. Meanwhile, across town, in a gleaming 40-story office building, Dr. Angela Rodriguez Williams sat in the boardroom of Williams Financial Group, completely unaware that her daughter's protected world was beginning to crumble. Angela was in the middle of discussing a major acquisition deal with 5 other executives, a conversation that involved moving millions of dollars with casual ease. Angela had spent 13 years crafting the perfect double life in business circles. She was known as Angela Rodriguez, the brilliant CEO who had taken her family's already successful financial empire and expanded it into new territories. Financial magazines featured her on their covers. Business schools taught case studies about her innovative strategies, and competitors respected her shrewd decision-making. But in her personal life, she was simply Angela Williams, Jessica's mom, who drove carpool, attended parent-teacher conferences, and worried about normal teenage problems like homework and friendships. She used her married name socially, lived in a beautiful but not ostentatious home, and had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that Jessica's childhood remained as normal as possible. This dual identity wasn't just about privacy. It was about protection. Angela remembered the pressures of growing up as banking royalty, the constant scrutiny, the way people treated her differently once they learned her last name. She was determined that Jessica would develop her own character, her own values, and her own sense of self-worth before learning about the immense power and responsibility that would one day be hers back at the bank. Jessica was experiencing culture shock in real time. She tried again to show Sharon her school identification, her birth certificate, and her savings account statements from the same bank, but Sharon's hostility only intensified. "Look, sweetie," Sharon said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Girls like you don't just walk around with this kind of money, honestly. I've been in banking for 20 years, and I know suspicious activity when I see it." The words hit Jessica like a slap. Girls like you. She'd heard those words before in movies, in news stories, but she'd never imagined they would be directed at her in her sheltered bubble. She'd been protected from the harsh realities of racial prejudice, and now it was hitting her full force. "Can you please just help me open an account?" Jessica asked, her voice beginning to waver as confusion and hurt crept in. "I don't understand why you're being so mean to me. I just want a bank here like everyone else." But Sharon had already made her decision. Her prejudices, her resentments, and her newfound power had combined into a toxic mixture that blinded her to everything except her own biases. "I don't think so. This money is probably stolen, and I'm not going to be part of whatever scheme you're running." Desperation began to creep into Jessica's voice. "It's not stolen. Please, if you could just call my mom. She can explain everything. She banks here too. Her name is Angela Williams." Sharon's eyes narrowed. "Nice try. You're not calling anyone until we figure out where you really got this money for. All I know, you're working with adults who sent you in here because they thought a kid would be less suspicious." What Sharon didn't realize was that if she had simply entered Angela Williams into the bank's computer system, she would have discovered a modest checking account belonging to a local parent, exactly what Jessica claimed. But Sharon never bothered to check. Her mind was already made up. As Jessica stood there, feeling smaller and more helpless, with each passing minute, other customers in the bank began to take notice. Some looked uncomfortable with Sharon's obviously hostile treatment of a young girl, but nobody spoke up. In that moment, Jessica learned a painful lesson about how the world could be, how people could stand by and watch. Injustice happened without intervening. The irony was staggering here. Stood Jessica Williams, the granddaughter of the Rodriguez banking dynasty, the daughter of one of Abasalon, the most powerful financial executives in the country, being treated like a criminal in a bank that her family's money had helped build and sustain for decades. But Sharon Mitchell had no way of knowing that in her mind, she was protecting the bank from a young scammer. In reality, she was about to destroy her own career by targeting the wrong family. As the tension in that bank lobby continued to escalate, Jessica felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crack. For the first time in her life, she was experiencing what millions of other young Black Americans faced regularly: the presumption of guilt, the questioning of their legitimacy, the exhausting burden of having to prove their worth to people who had already decided they weren't worthy. Little did anyone in that bank know that in just a few minutes, everything would change. Jessica's mother was about to receive a text message that would transform her from a concerned parent into an avenging force of nature. And Sharon Mitchell was about to learn that sometimes the people you underestimate have more power than you could ever imagine. Have you ever been discriminated against because of how you looked? Hit the subscribe button now and share your experience with others, as this could inspire someone. Jessica stood at that counter, her hands shaking as she pulled out every piece of identification she had brought with her. Her school ID from Westfield Preparatory Academy, with her smiling photo, her birth certificate that her mother had carefully laminated years ago, her savings account statements from this very same bank showing deposits and withdrawals going back 3 years. Jessica spread these documents across the counter like she was laying down cards in a game where her freedom was the stakes. "Please," she said, her voice trembling with desperation. "Look at these. They prove who I am. They prove this is my money." But Sharon Mitchell looked at those documents with the same expression someone might have when looking at garbage. She didn't even pick them up to examine them properly. Instead, she shook her head with disgust and said the words that would seal her own fate. "These are probably fake too. A 13-year-old with no job doesn't have this much money unless she took it from someone." That's when Jessica broke the weight of the injustice, the confusion, the fear. It all came crashing down on her at once. Tears started streaming down her face as the reality hit her. This woman wasn't going to help her. This woman had already decided Jessica was guilty before she'd even spoken a word. "Please," Jessica sobbed. "I just want to call my mom. She can explain everything." But Sharon's response revealed the true depth of her racism. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper, and said something so vile that other customers nearby actually gasped. "Your mom probably sent you here to launder drug money. I've seen this before with people like you." People like you. There it was. Again, Jessica felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. At 13 years old, she was learning for the first time that some people would look at her skin color and immediately assume the worst possible things about her and her family. Jessica was crying harder, now barely able to speak, through her tears. "Please, just let me call her. Just one phone call, please." But Sharon had already made up her mind about what came next. Instead of showing even a shred of human decency, instead of allowing a terrified child to call her parents, Sharon reached for the phone with a satisfied smile on her face. "I'm calling the police," she announced loudly enough for half the bank to hear. "This girl is clearly involved in some kind of fraud or theft, and I'm not going to let her manipulate me with crocodile tears." As Sharon dialed 911, Jessica realized she might have one chance to reach her mother while Sharon was talking to the police dispatcher. Jessica quietly pulled out her phone. With trembling fingers, she typed as fast as she could, her tears making it hard to see the screen. "Mom, I'm at First National Bank, and the manager called the cops on me. She says I stole the money and won't let me call you." "I'm scared." Jessica hit send just as Sharon finished her call and noticed what she was doing. "Give me that phone." Sharon snapped, lunging forward to grab it. But the message was already sent. It was traveling through cell towers across the city, heading toward a boardroom in a gleaming skyscraper where Jessica's mother was having what she thought was just another routine business meeting. Dr. Angela Rodriguez Williams sat at the head of a massive mahogany conference table on the 42nd floor of the Williams Financial Group building. Around her sat five of the most powerful bank executives in the state, men and women who controlled billions of dollars and made decisions that affected thousands of lives every single day. They were deep into their quarterly review discussing profit margins and market projections when Angela's phone buzzed on the table beside her. She glanced at it and saw Jessica's name on the screen. Angela had set up a special emergency contact for Jessica that would always come through, even during important meetings. But Angela never expected to use it. Jessica was supposed to be safely at school and then going to the bank for what should have been a simple routine transaction. Angela picked up her phone and read the message. The room full of powerful executives watched as the most controlled, composed woman they knew went through a transformation that was actually frightening to witness. First, confusion crossed her face as she tried to understand what she was reading. Then, as the meaning sank in, confusion turned to shock, and finally shock transformed into something far more dangerous. Pure cold rage. The temperature in that boardroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Angela's face became a mask of controlled fury that made everyone around the table unconsciously lean back in their chairs. "Gentlemen," Angela said, her voice so quiet and controlled that it was more terrifying than if she had screamed, "This meeting is over. Someone just made a very costly mistake." She stood up so abruptly that her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. The five executives, men and women, who were used to being the most important people in any room, suddenly felt very small and very nervous. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" asked Thomas Chen, the senior vice president who had been presenting the quarterly numbers. Angela was already walking toward the door, her phone in one hand, her car keys appearing in the other. "Someone at First National Bank just arrested my daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in that room knew exactly who Angela Rodriguez Williams was. They knew about her family's banking empire. They knew about her personal net worth. And they all suddenly realized that someone at First National had just made what might be the most expensive mistake in banking history. Angela was speed, dialing numbers as she walked, her heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots. First, her personal attorney, David Chen, one of the most feared lawyers in the state. Then her head of security, Robert Torres, a former police captain who had been protecting the Rodriguez family for 15 years, and finally a number that she rarely used but always kept close at hand, the direct line to Charles Morrison, the chairman of First National Bank's board of directors. "James," she called to her driver as she stepped into the elevator, "bring the car around. We're going to First National Bank." "See?" Now back at the bank, Jessica was living through every parent's worst nightmare. Two police officers had arrived within minutes of Sharon's call, and they walked into that building with their minds already made up about what they were going to find. Officer Bradley Walsh, a 15-year veteran of the force, approached the customer service counter where Jessica stood, crying his partner. Officer Maria Santos positioned herself nearby. Neither of them seemed interested in hearing Jessica's side of the story. "This girl was trying to deposit what I believe is stolen money," Sharon explained with obvious satisfaction. She has no legitimate explanation for where she got it, and she's been behaving suspiciously since she walked in here. Jessica tried to speak through her tears. Officers, please, I can explain everything. This is my money. I have all my identification. I just wanted to open a checking account. But Officer Walsh barely glanced at it. We get calls about kids like this all the time, he said, dismissively. Young people involved in theft, drug running, you name it. They always have some story about legitimate money. Jessica couldn't believe what she was hearing. Kids like this. The same phrase Sharon had used. She was starting to understand that this wasn't just about one racist bank manager. This was about a system that was designed to work against people who looked like her or like her. Please, Jessica begged. Just look at my identification. I go to Westfield Prep. My mother banks here too. You can verify everything. But the officers weren't interested in verification. Officer Santos was already pulling out her handcuffs. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, she commanded Jessica. Froze. Why? Why I didn't do anything wrong. You're being detained on suspicion of theft and fraud. Officer Walsh explained matter-of-factly. You can explain your story down at the station. The handcuffs clicked around Jessica's wrists with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire bank lobby. Other customers stopped what they were doing and stared in horror. A few pulled out their phones and started recording. An elderly woman near the teller window shook her head and muttered, "This is wrong." But nobody stepped forward to help. Nobody demanded that the officers slow down and actually investigate before arresting a 13-year-old girl. Jessica was learning another painful lesson about how the world worked, that most people, even when they knew something was wrong, would choose to stay safe and silent, rather than speak up for justice. As the officers led Jessica toward the door in handcuffs, Sharon Mitchell stood behind her counter with a satisfied smile in her mind. She had just protected her bank from a young criminal. She had no idea that she had actually just destroyed her own career, and possibly her entire future. But across town, a force of nature was heading in her direction. Angela Rodriguez-Williams was in the back seat of her Bentley, making phone calls that would change everything. Her driver James was weaving through traffic like he was driving an ambulance, and in the passenger seat, Angela's head of security was already coordinating with the bank's board of directors. If you want to see Sharon Mitchell get exactly what she deserves, you better hit that subscribe button right now, because the revenge that's coming is going to be absolutely epic. 23 minutes after Jessica sent that desperate text message, something extraordinary happened outside First National Bank. A sleek black Bentley with tinted windows so dark they looked like mirrors pulled up to the curb. But this wasn't just any luxury car. The license plate read RFH0001, standing for Rodriguez Financial Holdings, and anyone in the banking world would have recognized those initials immediately. The car door opened, and Dr. Ishur, Angela Rodriguez-Williams, stepped out onto the sidewalk. She wore a custom-tailored suit that cost more than most people's cars, $10,000, of Italian craftsmanship that fit her like armor. Her jewelry was understated, but unmistakably expensive, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that only comes from generational wealth and absolute power. But Angela wasn't alone. Behind her emerged David Chen, one of the most feared attorneys in the state, a man whose hourly rate was higher than most people's monthly salary. Next came Robert Taus, her head of security and a former police captain, whose presence immediately commanded respect. And finally, two additional security personnel who looked like they could handle any situation that might arise inside the bank. Customers who had been going about their normal business suddenly stopped and stared. You could feel the shift in the atmosphere, like the air pressure had changed before a storm. People instinctively moved out of the way as this powerful entourage approached the entrance. Even the police officers who had arrested Jessica glanced nervously toward the door. Angela walked through those glass doors with the commanding presence of someone who owned everything. She surveyed. Her heels clicked against the marble floor in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown to Judgment Day. Conversation stopped. Phones were lowered. Sharon Mitchell stood behind her customer service counter, still basking in what she thought was her moment of triumph. She had successfully removed what she believed was a troublemaker from her bank, and she was expecting praise from her superiors for her vigilance. But when Sharon looked up and saw Angela approaching, she had no idea who she was looking at. Despite Angela's photo appearing in financial magazines and business publications, for years, Sharon had never connected that face to Jessica Williams. The banking world knew Angela Rodriguez as a powerful CEO, but the photos were always professional. Headshot in business settings, never casual family photos, never pictures with her daughter. Angela walked directly to Sharon's counter, her dark eyes fixed on the woman who had dared to harm her child. When she spoke, her voice was so controlled and quiet that it was actually more terrifying than if she had been screaming, "Release my daughter!" Immediately, Sharon looked up at this obviously wealthy woman and felt a moment of confusion. But her arrogance quickly took over, and she actually had the audacity to scoff. "Look, lady, I don't know who you think you are, but your daughter is a thief. She was trying to deposit stolen money, and I did exactly what I was supposed to do. The police have already taken her away." Angela reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. But this wasn't just any business card. It was printed on heavy stock paper with gold lettering that caught the light. She placed it on the counter directly in front of Sharon with the precision of someone placing a chess piece for checkmate. "I'm Dr. Angela Rodriguez Williams," she said with deadly calm. "My family is Rodriguez Financial Holdings. We don't just bank here, Sharon. We own here." Sharon picked up the business card and read it, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. The name Rodriguez was legendary in banking circles. But surely this couldn't be. "I don't understand," Sharon stammered. "The girl's name is Williams, not Rodriguez." Angela's smile was colder than winter wind. "Rodriguez is my maiden name, Williams is my married name, and you just arrested the granddaughter of the man who founded this bank 80 years ago." The color began draining from Sharon's face as the magnitude of her mistake started to sink in. But Angela wasn't finished. She was just getting started. Rodriguez Financial Holdings owns 60% of First National Bank. Angela continued, her voice growing stronger and more commanding. With each word, "My family has been the controlling shareholder since 1943. Every promotion you've ever received, every paycheck you've ever cashed, every benefit you've ever enjoyed. It all came from my family's money." By now, a crowd had gathered around the customer service counter. Other bank employees were emerging from their offices, drawn by the commotion. Customers were pulling out their phones to record what was clearly going to be an epic confrontation. Angela's attorney, David Chen, stepped forward. At this point, "Miss Mitchell, are you seriously suggesting that a child having birthday money constitutes suspicious activity? Are you aware that racial profiling is a federal crime?" Before Sharon could respond, the main doors of the bank opened again, and Charles Morrison, the chairman of First National's board of directors, practically ran into the building. He was a distinguished man in his 70s who had been managing the Rodriguez family's banking interests for over 25 years. Morrison took one look at Angela and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. His face went pale as he approached the growing crowd around Sharon's counter. "Angela," he said, slightly out of breath from his rush to get there, I came as soon as I got your call. Where is Jessica? Is she hurt? The sight of the bank's chairman rushing in and addressing Angela by her first name with obvious familiarity sent shockwaves through the crowd of onlookers. Sharon felt her legs go weak as she realized she might be in more trouble than she had ever imagined. Charles, Angela replied, her voice softening slightly when addressing the family friend. Your employee here accused my 13-year-old daughter of theft and money laundering. She refused to let Jessica call me, had refused to verify her identity, and instead called the police to have her arrested. Morrison turned to look at Sharon with an expression of absolute horror. You did what? Sharon tried to defend herself, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. Sir, I was just following protocol for suspicious activity. The girl had a lot of cash and no valid explanation. No valid explanation? Angela interrupted, her voice rising for the first time. She told you it was birthday, money from her grandmother. She showed you her identification, her school records, her savings account, statements from this very bank. What more explanation did you need? Morrison was already on his phone calling for security footage to be reviewed immediately. Within minutes, they were all watching the bank's cameras on a monitor that had been brought out from the security office. The footage was damning. It showed Jessica entering the bank, politely approaching Sharon's counter with a smile and presenting her documents respectfully. It showed Sharon immediately becoming hostile, refusing to examine Jessica's identification, and treating her with obvious contempt from the very first moment. But more importantly, the footage showed other interactions Sharon had had over the past few months. Case after case of Sharon giving special scrutiny to minority customers, asking for additional documentation that she didn't require from white customers, and treating people of color with obvious suspicion and hostility. My God, Morrison whispered, as he watched the evidence of systematic discrimination playing out on the screen. Sharon, how long has this been going on? But Sharon couldn't answer. She was staring at the monitor in horror, watching her career implode in real time. Every racist assumption, every biased decision, every moment of discrimination was there for everyone to see. Angela turned to Morrison with steel in her voice. Tries, I want to know how many other customers have been treated this way. I want a full investigation into this woman's conduct, and I want it started immediately. Morrison nodded grimly. It will be done, Angela. I cannot begin to apologize for what has happened here today. This is absolutely inexcusable. But Angela, what wasn't looking for apologies? She was looking for justice. Where is my daughter now? She's been taken to the juvenile detention center for processing. Morrison replied, already pulling out his phone. But I can have her released immediately. I'll call the chief of police personally, as Morrison made his calls. Angela turned back to Sharon, who was now visibly shaking behind her counter. The irony of the situation was absolutely devastating. Sharon had spent 20 years working her way up in a bank that was owned by the very family she had just attacked. You know what the most tragic part of this is, Sharon? Angela said quietly. My daughter has never experienced racism before. Today, she's lived a sheltered life, protected from people like you. She walked into this bank with complete trust in the system, believing that if she was polite and honest, she would be treated fairly. Sharon tried to speak, but no words came out. Today, you stole her innocence, Angela continued. You taught a 13-year-old girl that some people will hate her for the color of her skin, no matter how educated she is, no matter how polite she is, no matter how legitimate her business is. That's something she can never unlearn. The security guards, who had been called to escort Sharon from the building, were the same ones who had stood by and watched Jessica being handcuffed earlier. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Mrs. Mitchell Morrison said, officially. Your employment with First National Bank is terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and you are permanently banned from all bank properties. As Sharon was led away in disgrace, Angela turned to address the crowd of customers and employees who had witnessed the entire confrontation. Let this be a lesson to everyone here, she said in a voice that carried to every corner of the bank. Racism isn't just morally wrong, it's bad business. It's expensive, and in this case, it just cost someone their entire career. But the story wasn't over yet. Angela still had to get to her daughter, who was sitting in a detention center, probably terrified and confused about how her simple trip to the bank had turned into such a nightmare. What would you have done if you were in Angela's shoes and your daughter was wrongly arrested? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to click the subscribe button for more stories like this. The aftermath of Sharon's firing was swift and absolutely devastating. Within 30 minutes of Chairman Morrison's announcement, security guards were already clearing out Sharon's office. 20 years of accumulated personal items, family photos, awards, certificates of achievement were unceremoniously dumped into cardboard boxes. Her access cards were revoked. Her computer password was changed, and her name was stripped from the employee directory. But this humiliation was just beginning. As word spread through the bank, employees who had worked with Sharon for years began to remember incidents they had previously overlooked. The way she would make jokes about certain customers, how she always seemed to require extra documentation from people of color. The subtle but consistent pattern of discrimination that everyone had noticed. But no one had been brave enough to report. Within 2 hours, Sharon's professional reputation was in ruins. The banking industry is surprisingly small, and news travels fast through professional networks by the end of that first day. Sharon's termination and the reasons behind it had spread to banks across the state by the end of the week. Financial institutions nationwide knew exactly what Sharon Mitchell had done to Jessica Williams. The story became a cautionary tale, whispered in banking conferences and professional development seminars. Sharon's name became synonymous with everything that was wrong with institutional racism in financial services. Her LinkedIn profile, once proudly displaying 2 decades of steady advancement through various positions, now showed a gap that every potential employer would understand without explanation. But Sharon's punishment was just the beginning of the systemic changes that Jessica's case would bring about. The police officers who had arrested Jessica without conducting any real investigation suddenly found themselves under the most intense scrutiny of their careers. Officer Bradley Walsh, a 15-year veteran who had prided himself on his quick response times and decisive action, discovered that speed and decisiveness meant nothing without fairness and thorough investigation. His body camera footage was reviewed frame by frame, revealing a pattern of assumptions and biases that his supervisors could no longer ignore. Officer Maria Santos, who had been the one to actually place handcuffs on Jessica, found herself facing questions about why she had never asked to see the documents Jessica kept trying to show them. Why had she automatically believed Sharon's accusations without verification? Why had she treated a crying 13-year-old like a hardened criminal? Both officers were suspended, pending a full internal affairs investigation that would examine not just this incident, but every arrest they had made involving minority suspects over the past 5 years. Their cases were reviewed for patterns of racial bias. Their reports were scrutinized for language that might indicate prejudice, and their training records were examined to see if they had missed crucial education about implicit bias and community policing. The investigation revealed disturbing patterns. Officer Walsh had arrested black suspects at a rate nearly 3 times higher than his white colleagues. Despite working the same neighborhoods, Officer Santos had used force against minority suspects significantly more often than against white suspects in similar situations. The data painted a clear picture of systemic bias that could no longer be ignored. Do you think Sharon and the officer's punishment was enough? Or should there have been even more consequences for what they did to Jessica? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because the final chapter of this story is going to show you the long-term impact of what happened in that bank that day. The police department's handling of Jessica's case became a case study in what not to do when responding to calls involving minors and people of color they had failed to verify. Basic facts. Refused to listen to Jessica's explanation and immediately sided with an adult's word over a child's simply because of racial stereotypes and assumptions about economic class. The public outrage was swift and sustained. Community groups that had been complaining about police bias for years suddenly had a perfect example of how the system failed young people of color. The fact that Jessica came from a wealthy family only highlighted how much worse the treatment must be for children without powerful advocates. Within weeks, the police department was forced to implement sweeping reforms. New protocols required officers to conduct thorough investigations before making arrests, especially when children were involved. Officers were mandated to complete enhanced bias training every 6 months. Body camera footage would be randomly reviewed for signs of discriminatory behavior, and most importantly, a civilian oversight board was established to investigate complaints of racial profiling. Meanwhile, Chairman Morrison was working 18-hour days to repair the damage to First National Bank's reputation and implement changes that would prevent similar incidents from ever happening again. He knew that the Rodriguez family's continued ownership of the bank depended on his ability to prove that this was an isolated incident, not representative of the institution's values. The changes were comprehensive and immediate. Every single employee, from part-time tellers to senior executives, was required to complete 40 hours of bias training. Within 60 days, the training wasn't just online modules that people could click through mindlessly. It included role-playing exercises, real-world scenarios, and face-to-face discussions about unconscious bias and customer service excellence. New protocols were established specifically for serving minor customers. Young people would no longer be automatically viewed with suspicion simply because of their age. Staff were trained to recognize that teenagers from different economic backgrounds might have legitimate reasons for carrying cash or making large deposits. Most importantly, the bank established a rule that no customer under 18 could be refused service or reported to authorities without the approval of at least 2 managers and documentation of specific policy violations. But the most important changes were happening in the Rodriguez family's private conversations. The drive home from the juvenile detention center was the longest 20 minutes of both Jessica's and Angela's lives. Jessica stared out the window, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by, trying to process how her safe, predictable world had suddenly become so complicated and frightening. "Mom," Jessica finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "why did that woman hate me so much? I've never even met her before today. I was polite. I had all my documents. I didn't do anything wrong." Angela's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she struggled to find the right words to explain something that she herself still found incomprehensible. How do you tell a 13-year-old that some people will hate her for something as arbitrary as the color of her skin? Baby Angela said, pulling the car over to the side of the road so she could give this conversation me the attention it deserved. "What happened to you today wasn't about anything you did or didn't do. That woman made assumptions about you based on the color of your skin, and that's called racism. It's ugly and it's wrong, but it's something that exists in this world." Jessica turned to look at her mother with confusion and hurt written all over her face. But we have money. We live in a nice house. I go to a good school. Doesn't that matter this? Was the moment Angela had been dreading for 13 years. She had spent Jessica's entire life trying to create a bubble where her daughter could grow up free from the harsh realities of prejudice and discrimination. She had carefully crafted a life where Jessica would be judged by her character and achievements rather than her race or family wealth. But now that bubble had been shattered, and Angela realized that her protection might have actually left Jessica more vulnerable. "Sweetheart," Angela said, taking a deep breath, "I need to tell you something important about our family. We don't just have money. We have a lot of money, more than most people could ever imagine." Over the next 2 hours, sitting in that car on the side of the road, Angela explained everything. The Rodriguez banking dynasty that had started with her great-grandfather in the 1940s, the family's current net worth of $2.88 billion. The fact that they owned controlling interest, not just in First National Bank, but in dozens of other financial institutions across the country. Jessica learned that her comfortable middle-class life had actually been carefully constructed to hide the reality of her family's immense wealth and power. The modest house was actually just one of 7 properties the family owned. The public school events Angela attended were balanced by private board meetings where she made decisions affecting thousands of employees and millions of customers. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jessica asked, feeling overwhelmed by these revelations and slightly betrayed by the deception. Angela reached over and took her daughter's hands. "Because I wanted you to develop your own character. First, I wanted you to understand the value of hard work, kindness, and humility before you learned about the responsibility that comes with our family's position. I thought I was protecting you from the pressures and expectations that come with extreme wealth, but I realize now that I may have left you unprepared for the real world." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, staring down at their joined hands as she processed everything she had learned. "So we could have stopped what happened today." "Yes," Angela said firmly, "and we did stop it. But more importantly, we're going to make sure it doesn't happen to other kids who don't have our advantages." That conversation in the car marked the beginning of Jessica's transformation from a sheltered teenager into a young activist with a clear sense of purpose. She spent the next several weeks reading everything she could about civil rights, economic justice, and the history of discrimination in financial services. She learned about redlining, predatory lending, and the countless ways that banking institutions had been used to perpetuate racial inequality. But Jessica also learned about the power of advocacy and the importance of using privilege to fight for others. Within a month of her arrest, the Rodriguez Family Foundation announced a major new initiative designed to educate young people about their financial rights and provide resources for families who face discrimination in banking. The program, called Financial Justice for All, was comprehensive and ambitious. It included educational workshops for teenagers about their rights when opening accounts or conducting banking business. It provided legal resources for families who face discrimination. It funded community organizations that worked to promote financial literacy in underserved communities. And it established a hotline that young people could call if they experienced treatment similar to what Jessica had faced. Jessica became the face of the campaign, sharing her story at schools, community centers, and youth organizations across the state. Her message was simple but powerful. Every young person deserved to be treated with dignity and respect when conducting legitimate business, regardless of their race, economic background, or age. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of young people came forward with their own stories of discrimination and unfair treatment. Many had simply accepted poor service or suspicious treatment as normal, not realizing that they had rights and advocates who would fight for them. First National Bank, meanwhile, was implementing changes that would become a model for financial institutions across the country. The new youth-friendly policies went far beyond simple bias training. The bank redesigned its customer service approach specifically for minor clients, recognizing that young people might need additional guidance and patience when learning to navigate financial systems. Special youth specialists were hired and trained to work specifically with customers under 18. These specialists understood that teenagers might have questions that seemed basic to adults, that they might be nervous about their first banking experiences, and that they deserve the same level of professional service as any adult customer. The bank also created educational materials specifically designed for teenagers who were opening their first accounts. These materials explained banking terminology, outlined customer rights, and provided clear guidelines about what documents were needed for different types of transactions. Most importantly, they established clear protocols to prevent any customer from being treated with suspicion or hostility based on their appearance or assumed economic status. But perhaps the most powerful moment in this entire story came exactly 1 week after Sharon's termination. When Angela returned to First National Bank to address the remaining staff, she stood in the main lobby where her daughter had been humiliated and arrested, wearing the same commanding presence that had so effectively dismantled Sharon's career. The entire staff was assembled: tellers, managers, security guards, and administrative personnel. They stood in nervous silence as Angela prepared to speak, knowing that their jobs and the bank's future might depend on what she said next. My family built wealth in this country, despite people like Sharon trying to stop us. Angela began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the building. My great-grandfather started with nothing but determination and a belief that financial services should be available to everyone, regardless of the color of their skin or the neighborhood they came from. She paused to look around the room, making eye contact with individual employees as she continued. He faced discrimination that was legal and openly practiced. In his time, banks refused to serve him. Loan officers told him to his face that they didn't do business with people like him, but he didn't give up. He worked twice as hard, saved every penny, and eventually started his own bank that would serve everyone fairly. Angela's voice grew stronger as she warmed to her theme. 3 generations later, my daughter walked into this bank, a bank that her great-great-grandfather's money helped build, and was treated like a criminal by someone who was paid with my family's money. The irony would be laughable if it weren't so tragic. The room was absolutely silent as Angela continued. Jessica will learn from this experience that respect isn't given. It's demanded, and we have the power to demand it. But more importantly, she'll learn that having power means using it to protect people who don't have power. Angela's speech was recorded by local news crews and posted online, where it quickly went viral. The video was shared millions of times, becoming a rallying cry for economic empowerment and civil rights. But for Angela, it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about ensuring that no other child would go through what Jessica had experienced. The speech also served as a clear warning to anyone in the financial services industry who might be tempted to engage in discriminatory practices. The message was unmistakable. The Rodriguez family was watching. They had the resources to fight back, and they weren't afraid to use their power to demand justice. 3 months later, Jessica returned to First National Bank to finally open that checking account she had originally come for. But this time, she wasn't just a sheltered 13-year-old trying to prove her independence. She was a young woman who understood both her privilege and her responsibility, who had learned hard lessons about the world's injustices, but had also discovered her own power to fight against them. The staff treated her with the utmost respect and professionalism, of course, but Jessica made it clear that she expected the same respectful treatment for every young customer who walked through those doors. She had learned that having power means using it to protect people who don't have the same advantages. The account opening process that should have taken 15 minutes the first time was completed in less than 5 minutes. This time, Jessica received a welcome packet specifically designed for young customers, a personal introduction to her youth specialist, and a clear explanation of all the services available to her. As for Sharon Mitchell, her downfall was complete and irreversible. The banking industry's informal networks ensured that her story followed her wherever she tried to find new employment. Financial services, companies, insurance firms, and related businesses all knew exactly what she had done and why she had been fired. Sharon discovered that reputation in the professional world is everything. And once it's destroyed, it's almost impossible to rebuild. She found herself working a series of low-paying retail jobs, each one a painful reminder of the career she had thrown away through her own prejudice and hatred. But perhaps the most fitting part of Sharon's punishment was that she was forced to watch from afar as the banking industry she'd been expelled from underwent the very changes that might have saved her career if she had embraced them earlier. Every news story about bias training, every article about inclusive customer service, every recognition that First National Bank received for its progressive policies was a reminder of what she could have been part of if she had chosen differently. And Sharon's chance of working in banking again, also zero. But her story had become a powerful teaching tool used in bias training programs across the country to illustrate the real-world consequences of discrimination and prejudice. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next